Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So grateful to be with us here at ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. The title of this evening's presentation is Noetic Metaphysics, and that's going to be given to us by Desiree Van Sanen.
So we're doing a presentation today on Noetic Metaphysics, and we have this Hermetic truism to kind of explore a little bit. The plane of spiritual unity and volition cannot be approached except by intensely developing the power of abstraction. We're going to be getting into the area of defining Noetic metaphysics, what is volition and what is abstraction going forward. But it's interesting that this triune approach of these three things are so important to any kind of spiritual development and discernment. But we'll be touching upon those three aspects. Let's see if I can move forward here. So before I get going, I wanted to actually do something we don't often do, but probably should do more often. And that is just to briefly go over the underlying principles of the philosophy of theosophy. And the reason being that so much of what we explore in the SD and other theosophical literature is packed full of information that we can't possibly understand without these three principles, without being able to fully digest these principles in advance. And I just thought it would be nice every so often that we just briefly go over them. And the first of the three principles is an understanding that there is a boundless, undefinable, universal principle that encompasses all life, known and unknown, that is the basis or the substratum of all existence, the one. It is expressed in two aspects, which are absolute abstract motion and absolute abstract space. So this ability to conceive of such a thing, even if it on its peripheral, takes a lot of practice, a lot of contemplation. It's not necessarily an immediate thing, although we do get sparks of that absoluteness or beingness in the process of that volition of looking for truth. The esoteric doctrine teaches, like Buddhism and Brahmanism, and even in the Kabbalah, that the one infinite and unknown essence exists from all eternity and in regular and harmonious successions is either passive or active. And this action of rolling out and then coming back in is also known as the Great Breath. And she indicates that the Svavavikas, or the philosophers of the oldest school of Buddhism, which still exists in Nepal, or at least did in her time, speculate only upon the active condition of this essence, which they call Svabhavat, and deem it foolish to theorize upon the abstract and unknowable power in its passive condition. So that being understood, what we can begin to explore is this idea of Svabhavat, or beingness. The universal law of periodicity is the second fundamental principle. It has to do with the twin law of karma and reincarnation. And karma being the law that puts that which has been taken out of harmony with the flow of nature, it reacts to put that harmony back into nature in a reaction, or what we would experience as a reaction. And so karma is not something that can be owned. It is not mine. It's not yours. It's not a good. It's not a bad any more than gravity is. It is strictly law. And because we commit acts all the time that are not in alignment with that natural flow of nature, we receive responses from that. And all that is nature putting things back into place. So we call it the karma as the law of harmony, because it always replaces that which has been taken out of harmony and discord back into accord. And because we are always committing these permutations We have to reincarnate over and over again until we get it right. This is a kind of a learning ground, but we do it. I think we set up our own karma in a way. We set up our own lives in a way so that we can better learn. And so, what is all this leading to? And that which leads us to the third principle, which is evolution. And it comes from this Latin expression of evolutio, which means an unrolling or an expansion. So, in some sense, the will of the universal mind is to know itself, which is volition, through volution, which is a spiraling. I think this one phrase from Carl Sagan says it perfectly, and it's interesting coming from a man who was pretty much materialistic most of his career, but he writes probably with a spark of nous that the cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. It's very telling. To talk a little bit more about this absoluteness and abstraction, HPB writes in the SD, in the earliest parts of the SD, I think in the proem itself, she writes the infinite and eternal cause, dimly formulated in the unconscious and unknowable of the current European philosophy, is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is the course devoid, it is of course devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. It is beingness rather than being, in Sanskrit, sat, and is beyond all thought or speculation. This beingness is symbolized in the secret doctrine under two aspects. On the one hand, absolute abstract space representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. On the other, absolute abstract motion, representing unconscious, unconditioned consciousness. Even our Western thinkers have shown that consciousness is inconceivable to us apart from change, and motion best symbolizes change, its essential characteristic. This latter aspect of the one reality is also symbolized by the term, the great breath, a symbol sufficiently graphic to need no further elucidation. Thus, then, the first fundamental axiom of the secret doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute beingness, symbolized by finite intelligences as the theological trinity, which is symbolized up here. Mm-hmm. So if we talk about Plato's metaphysics, I can just say that it's in its most simple terms. It starts with a two-tiered theory of reality, meaning that there is the one reality that is universal, that is the font from which ideas and forms come from. It is independent of the sense world. It is eternal, unchanging, and can be reached, at least in its peripheral. When I speak of peripheral, I'm talking about the svabhava, because that's the active, through different degrees of understanding. The sensible world of becoming, or the world of being, is the realm of particulars. It's the world of changing objects, a moving mind. It is subject to time and space in a relative sense, and is experienced by the senses. And so the idea of understanding the Noetic Metaphysics is really about understanding that what connects one with the other. It's the science of the soul, in a sense. It was Edgar Mitchell, and I think most of you know him as the either founder or co-founder of the Ions Institute, also an an astronaut who, and I don't know if he was the sixth one on the moon, But at any rate, it was during his moon travel that he experienced something very kind of an epiphany. And looking at the earth there levitated amongst the ocean of darkness, he realized something immediately. He said that, and he put it to ink, he said, the presence of divinity became almost palpable. And I knew that life in the universe was not just an accident based on random processes. The knowledge came to me directly. So part of this understanding news or this noetic exploration is trying to understand what is this message that's coming to us, and how is it coming to us, and is it something we already know but we're just realizing it now in a reflective state? Because he says it comes to you directly. So there's no intellect that we know in the conventional sense that's trying to parse it out, trying to figure it out. It's just an automatic knowing that seems to come from within out. So, what is noetic metaphysics? And we can talk about just noetics as far as its original Greek meaning. It meant intellectual, or from the verb noen, to think, and from the noun nous, meaning mind. It is nous that is responsible for the act of perceiving inner wisdom, direct knowing, intuitional sight, or implicit understanding. Medical Metaphysical science and parapsychologists work to uncover the powers behind such phenomena expressed by, for instance, an electromagnetic universe, clairvoyance, telepathy, vision, precognition, the significance of dream states, and near-death experiences, as well as many other phenomena. But noetic metaphysics is goes much deeper. It goes well beyond that because it tries to search out the origins of things, the source of consciousness, its complexity, its unity within the universe, its divinity, and the causeless cause of it all. I really, and of course, in the Theosophical Glossary, we have nous as a Platonic term for the higher mind or soul. It means spirit as distinct from animal soul or psyche. It's divine consciousness or mind in man, taken from Egypt, where it was called Nut. It was adopted by the Gnostics for their first conscious aeon, which, with the occultists, is the third logos, cosmically, and the third principle or manus in man. I think this, if you look over to the left, this, I don't know if you can see it very well, we have a wood etching of a Flammarion art piece here that was documented in a book on meteorology in 1888. But you can kind of see the astronomer over here dressed in a pink garb, where he's actually looking past all of the stars and this parameter here and into what's beyond it, trying to find the laws that are making this beautiful creation. It's a beautiful piece of art there. It speaks a lot. So when we're looking at nous or this noetic science, we're really trying to look behind the wizard's curtain. We can imagine the protagonist of Dorothy um, finding herself in this phenomenal world full of sensual things and beautiful colors and even tragic enemies such as the Wicked Witch of the West or the East. And she's struggling to find her way home. And here she is on this yellow brick road until she meets up finally with the wizard. Her first instinct is to force herself through her fear to push back that curtain to see what was on the other side. And that's exactly what I think metaphysics does, is it pushes to see what is behind the effect, the force that is behind the effect. But noetic metaphysics goes even further because it sets out to find out what is even behind the force, to look at the whole ontology, to see the whole picture. Okay, so we can talk a little bit about volition too, because that's a part of our hermetic truism. Mahatma Gandhi said strength does not come from physical capacity, it comes from an indomitable will. But volition comes in many different forms, or I should say, many different intensities or vibrations. Um, Conventionally, volition is will. It's the power to choose a course of action, to cause to move by reason, by affections, circumstances, sensual impulses, or other influences. Biblically, there are actually some distinctions made with regard to volition. There's the volition of God, which is eternal and unchanging, the volition of angels, which might have a parallel with our deities and elementals and other forces. And then there's the volition of humans, which can either be direct or permissive. We talked a little bit about that direct knowing. The permissive is the one that's more based on the ever changing conditions in our lives. The characteristics of volition in the Vedanta describe the traits associated with will and intentionality, which do not exist in the highest Purusha. That doesn't mean that Purusha doesn't have some degree of volition, but it doesn't have the traits associated with what we experience as will and intentionality, because it is, for instance, eternal and unchanging. The concept also encompasses the attributes of the mind that involve willpower and decision making, likened to the reins that govern the senses. These characteristics highlight the importance of choice and control in functioning of the mind, distinguishing the realm of human experience from the pure awareness of the highest Purusha. And this is the process of developing spiritual discretion. And I think it has a significance to our paramitas in the voice for Virya, where it says that dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. And I remember a conversation I had with my father way back when I think I was a teenager and probably was too impatient to really capture the true meaning here. But he would say, when you are ready for spiritual advancement, when one's quest for truth is almost as urgent as the need to breathe. And I think in my later years, I was that would make more sense to me than it did when I was a 14-year-old. But I got to thinking that it's perhaps the supernal truth as being the great breath itself. So um, HPB speaks of abstraction and on volition early on. And I'm not sure if this was in the proem or not, but it was on page 44 if anyone wants to look for it. She writes, the desire for a sentient life, which is volition, shows itself in everything from an atom to a sun and is a reflection of the divine thought propelled into objective existence, into a law that the universe should exist. According to esoteric teaching, the real cause of that supposed desire and of all existence remains forever hidden, and its first emanations are the most complete abstractions mind can conceive. These abstractions must of necessity be postulated as the cause of the material universe, which presents itself to the senses and intellect, and they underlie the secondary and subordinate powers of nature, which, anthropomorphized, have been worshipped as God and gods by the common herd of every age. It is impossible to conceive anything without a cause. The attempt to do so makes the mind blank. This is virtually the condition to which the mind must come at last when we try to trace back the chain of causes and effects. But both science and religion jump to this condition of blankness much more quickly than is necessary, for they ignore the metaphysical abstractions, which are the only conceivable cause of physical concretions. These abstractions become more and more concrete as they approach our plane of existence until finally they phenomenalize in the form of the material universe by a process of conversion of metaphysics into physics, analogous to that by which steam can be condensed into water and the water frozen into ice. Speaking a little bit more on abstraction, we use abstraction all the time, although we might not think that we are necessarily using abstraction. When we conceptualize and imagine anything beyond our senses within this phenomenal world, we use abstraction when we deductively reason and through the law of correspondences and analogy. It is represented in our expression of art, music, movement, mathematics, myth, and symbols, as well as storytelling, which we're going to get into a little bit later. But the power of abstraction in spiritual development focuses on the development of mental states through meditation, contemplation, concentration, and devotionals that assist the student to withdraw from the external distractions, the details of minutiae of the outer life for the sake of true self or soul discovery. This attention requires a distillation of the senses, a neutralization of effects, or a disassociation from attachments, and a harmonization, which means the synthesis of heart and mind. Yes. So, what is this about? Well, let's talk a little bit about Bodhi in Vimutti. The abstract noun Bodhi means to be awakened or awakened. It's the knowledge or wisdom of awakened intellect or divine wisdom. Vimutti is freedom from the hindrances, that which distracts or fetters the process of awakening. In the voice, we can read the difference between the Dharma of the eye and the Dharma of the heart. The Dharma of the eye is the embodiment of the external and the non existing. The Dharma of the heart is the embodiment of Bodhi, the permanent and everlasting. The lamp burns bright when wick and oil are clean. To make them clean, a cleaner is required. The flame feels not the process of the cleaning. The branches of a tree are shaken by the wind. The trunk remains unmoved. And in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 8, we read, "This perishable body, O son of Kunti, is known as Kshetra. Those who are acquainted with the true nature of things call the soul who knows it the Kshetrajna. Know also that I am the knower in every mortal body, O son of Bharata. That knowledge, which through the soul is a realization of both the known and the knower, is alone esteemed by me as wisdom. What the kshetra or body is, what it resembleth, what it produceth, and what is its origin, and also who he is who, dwelling within, knoweth it, as well as what is his power. Learn all in brief from me. It has been manifoldly sung by the rishis with discrimination and with arguments in the various Vedic hymns which treat of Brahma." In an article by Damodara Mavalankar, he writes of the importance of both the objective and the subjective, that you need one, the subjective, in order for the objective to ever manifest. Yet you need the objective in order to be able to understand that which is subjective. So he writes, abstract space and eternity are invisible, and therefore to try to fix time and place as though they were absolute realities is neither metaphysical nor philosophical. However, an objective standpoint is essential. In the economy of nature, everything is right in its place, and to ignore a certain plane is just as illogical as to overestimate it. True knowledge consists in a right sense of discrimination, to be able to perceive what phenomenon performs what function and how to utilize it for human progress and happiness. Both the objective and subjective standpoints, as much as the inductive and deductive methods, are therefore essential for the attainment of true knowledge, which is true power. And H.P. writes about this link between mind and matter, um, the subject and the object. And we know that it's really threefold because we have the subject and the object and the verb or the verbum. Just as the opposite poles of subject and object, spirit and matter are but aspects of the one unity in which they are synthesized, so in the manifested universe, there is that which links spirit to matter, subject to object. This something, at present unknown to Western speculation, is called by the occultists Vohat. It is the bridge by which the ideas existing in the divine thought are impressed upon cosmic substance as the laws of nature. Vohat is thus the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, or regarded from the other side, it is the intelligent medium, the guiding power of all manifestation, the thought divine transmitted and made manifest through the Dianchohans, the architects of the visible world. Thus, from spirit or cosmic ideation comes our consciousness, from cosmic substance, the several vehicles in which that consciousness is individualized and attains to self, or reflective consciousness, while Vohat and its various manifestations is the mysterious link between mind and matter, the animating principle electrifying every atom into life. So, as Malavankar spoke, we need to have the objective in order to make sense of that which is synthesized. And I kind of just wrote down some things that we experience in the conventional everyday sense in terms of sensory information and information gathering, problem solving, evaluating, uh, ethics, law, language and syntax, working memory, decision making, and reasoning. But we're doing this on a very conditional and ever changing basis. What kind of helps us to get to that peripheral of the all knowing is going to be through an aspiration and an inspiration, uh, an involution and an evolution of that movement. It leads to cognition. It leads to an understanding of true discretion. It involves the renunciation of or attachment to the things that were, and it requires the ability to take an overarching idea and using it as a almost like a graph for understanding everything else. So if we could take let's just say this unfolding that nature provides for us all the time in its various manifestations that we call Fibonacci, and we can understand that there's a mathematical component to life. If we could understand that pattern, we could probably be able to take that as a template for other ideas. And one of the things that is so important about being able to utilize this kind of abstraction, and I like to use astronomers as a way of showing how when you don't use it, it really kind of puts you in a box of not being able to fill in those inquiry gaps. If you can think back that once upon a time we could only see to the horizon, and so people thought the world was flat. But as we began to travel, we knew that we could travel in a circle. We saw that the planets around us were circular. And as our technology advanced, we could say that the edge of our life, or the edge of the universe, was our solar system. But then that was that. But then our technology increased, and we were able to see the Milky Way, a galaxy. And then we put a parameter around that and said that's the edge of the universe. Well, now we know that there's billions upon billions of galaxies out there. And so we can see from the microwave, the Wilkinson microwave telescope, this huge, vast, egg-shaped universe. And now they're saying that's the edge of the universe. Here's the problem. We haven't learned how to take what we know and throw that net out. Yeah, it's the edge of something, but it's not the edge. It's not the end. We have to learn how to take what we do know as fact and be able to spread it out. The best way to do that is to take very broad concepts that we know to be true and use those as a kind of a backdrop for filling in all of our gaps, whether it be in science or religion. So anyway, what I think is important about this one slide here is that none of these things on the far that are under objective experience could ever happen if they did not already exist in their perfect form already, their perfect subjective form, which is sound. All of this is actually sound, but this is its perfect sound. These ideas, these concepts that are on the other side, the subjective side, are really one thing, but they're expressed in different ways. And the way I think to best evolve a pattern of thought from one side, the objective side, to the subjective is being able to practice these central ideas of aligning the heart with the mind, to experience childlike wonderment again, to be able to fully utilize archetypes and abstractions. And of course, there's also an ethical practice here that you might not find in um, metaphysical science. With noetic science, with noetic metaphysics, there is always an ethical and a moral guiding power. And it is pervasive, all pervasive love, which is the centerpiece of all of this. I also want to talk a little bit about the number 3 because all numbers are within us. And they're not simply numbers for adding. They're they're actually living entities, living forces that just may happen to be symbolized as these numbers. 3 is probably one of the most prominent, and it's used to describe anything and everything, because we can't describe a single thing without having a 3 points. We can't build anything without 3 points. 3 is the most common number, I think, or at least 3 or its multiples, the most common numbers used in many mystical practices and religions. The Christian Holy Trinity, the 3 Magi, the 3 Abrahamic patriarchs, 3 days from death to resurrection. All of these are symbolic of actions within nature itself. Hinduism have the triadic gnosis. We know that there's that Chit and Anad, truth, consciousness, and bliss, the 3 paths to enlightenment. Out of the Bhagavad Gita, the Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. Plus, everything is expressed in 3s: Sataraja, Tamas, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Buddhism has its 3 jewels, the Taoist, its 3 treasures of compassion, simplicity, and humility. And we can go on. I just named a few here to um, you could have a whole session in or series assigned to the number 3 and other numbers as well. But we actually need these 3 numbers in life. We need it to describe our past, present, and future, our beginning, middle, and end. We need it to describe even a simple sentence, subject, verb, object, to describe our surroundings in terms of length, width, and height, distance, small, medium, or large. Even our own DNA, RNA, and proteins are built upon the number 3. The atom is built upon the number 3. And of course, the great savant, Nikola Tesla, gave us a clue when he said, if you only knew the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe. But why is this so important to news? Why is this so important to Buddhi? Because it's within us. We can't tell a story without the construct of 3. We need to have a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. A Brahma to set out, breathe out the conditions, an antithesis, or Vishnu to work out those conditions, and a synthesis, or Shiva, to finally come to a resolution or dissolution. And another thing, too, that we understand is that 3 is the number that people, or a series of 3 is a number that people are able to remember best. So there's no doubt in my mind why, you have oftentimes in a story, you have either 3 main characters or it's being expressed in a trilogy. And so it takes us to the end here. So I want to visit the story of Dorothy on her mission to go back home. She's on a yellow path, a yellow brick road. Interesting that yellow is the sign of Buddhi. And it's also interesting that she gathers up her heart, she gathers up her mind, and she gathers up courage. And so I just wanted to leave you guys with that. Oh, it's a little something about the logos, but okay, I'm back.
Hello there, Desiree. I'm going to
Hi.
including host for the Q&A here. Well, thank you for that amazing presentation. I enjoyed that immensely. And
Thank you. Thank
this
you for
idea,
being patient for me reading all that. I got it.
yeah, no, it was great. And the slides were wonderful, the pictures and everything like that. The idea of Noetic Metaphysics, at one translation, you said it is the search for the origin of consciousness. I found that just kind of a fascinating little umbrella. And I certainly want to invite any questions, but before we get other questions from the audience, I did want to just ask you, how is it that you came up with the Wizard of Oz? Was it because she has 3 companions, or they're looking behind the curtain? Wizard himself.
Well, I don't think that Frank Baum, who wrote the Wizard of Oz, I don't know that his background. I know that the only thing I know about him as a writer is that he was more into playwriting and stagecraft. But but I don't know if he had any theosophical background or anything like that, or even philosophical background. But here's the funny thing: I don't think you need a philosophical background because I think these are things that are naturally within us. There's a reason why we can read a book with these characters and with these archetypes and actually feel a sense of knowing with them, or um, a familiarity maybe. It's because they're already within us. Um, and
It's
it's,
very
you can't tell a story. You need to have the conditions set up, and then the plot where everybody has to struggle to work it out, and then there's a resolution at the end. And sometimes that just leads into a new cycle. The outcome leads into a new cycle. But I thought The Wizard of Oz is amazing to me because it is a journey. The protagonist is on a journey, and in order to be successful in that journey of going home, the protagonist needs to have the heart and mind and courage, which goes back to the volition that was in the hermetic those hermetic words.
very much so, and thank you for those review at the beginning of the theosophical principles, and then of course this idea that the noetic physics requires abstraction. And curiously enough, even in that Wizard of Oz storybooks and the movie, the famous Judy Garland movie, the three characters of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion are farmhands from her day-to-day life. So in a
Right.
sense, people are like a physical manifestation, as you were saying. And then when you get to this noetic world, in the upper world of as she goes up in the tornado, then they become these abstract, concept characters. And I do see one hand raised, so thank you for that fun movie, because I enjoyed that movie a lot. So
Me
let's
too.
start with Laurie and then go to Judy. So first, Laurie Kelly, had a question from you?
Yes, I was going to say that he actually was a theosophist.
Oh, really? Okay.
He joined the Theosophical Society in 1892.
Well, so there's a reason they were on a yellow brick road. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I looked him up, but I just did a really cursory review, and I couldn't find. And I thought maybe he had some kind of at least a philosophical background, because I was applying all these, theosophical. It just seemed like there were a lot of theosophical motifs in there, and I didn't know if it was just me interpreting or if it was actually just something coming through noetically in an individual. But so it's good to know that. I know that what is it? The author of the Wizard, not the Wizard of Oz, the Alice in Wonderland, I think was also.
Mhm. Those are fascinating stories. Well, thank you for that clarification that he was
Yeah,
a
thank
theosopher.
you.
Let's go to Judy. I see you have a hand raised. What's your question or comment there, Judy?
Hi, Judy.
Oh, hi. Yeah, wonderful presentation. I've always loved the Bauhaus mystics, Kandinsky and Clay, and their geometry. And what you said about knowledge and wisdom already being inside of us made me think of really a Platonic idea that theosophy is knowledge of the soul, and that philosophy is the study of that knowledge of the soul.
Oh,
And so this idea that unless you're a high-level logician, analytic philosopher, that you're not a philosopher, which is what I got thrown at me at UC Berkeley.
oh,
Although
really?
I got through the program to a master's degree. No, I mean, the snobbery was just unbelievable.
Oh my.
No, we only had one suicide when I was there. People took it that seriously, but it really leads me further to the Platonic idea of what you were showing, these geometric figures and numbers
Mhm.
seem to have existed from eternity, and they are prior to any physical manifestation of them. Whereas the modern logical empiricist looks at it in just the opposite way and therefore is really furthering delusion. Do
I
you think
agree.
that's true?
I totally agree with you there. I hope it's changing.
There are some people that are a little different now in academia and also in the field of religious studies, but and unfortunately, the competitive nature of academics has kept the full nature of philosophy from really developing in it, as it did in someone like Emerson, for example. But hopefully, education will change eventually.
I think
Now,
it goes. I think. Do you think education goes through sort of a dark period, and then it comes out of it and goes through a renaissance, and then goes back into a dark period, and um, it seems like it kind of is. I don't know.
yeah,
I feel like education is taking a downward track, and well, I don't want to get on a side note here, but yeah, and a lot of it I think has to do with even though we have more access to information, we've lost the art of communication a lot, and the art of just writing and expressing those deeper intuitive thoughts that we've just become so distracted with outer stimulation that, and I think it leads to a lot of depression too,
hmm,
that we're not able to communicate in ways that we used to. Um, so I don't want to
Well,
get
very
to.
much. Yeah, I appreciate that, those comments about Plato and civilization. One thing you had in one of the early slides, Desiree, was the idea of evolution from the Latin root word about the unfolding or the movement, which I thought was a fascinating sort of a different perspective of evolution that I've thought of before. And certainly society and culture, and you were talking about education evolving and changing, has been growing as well. And some say that the torch of civilization will go to different cultures over the centuries and different ethnic groups and different nations. I believe it was Jacob Bernowski who had a PBS TV series back in the 80s or so, maybe the 90s, called The Ascent of Man, the rising up, the ascent of man. And of course, one of his early questions is, do we consider ourselves higher than the apes or lower than the angels? And I think the materialistic scientists do say that we're materialistically higher than the apes. But theosophy, of course, indicates the opposite, as Judy was talking about these opposites, that we really are descended from um, the um, the astral realm, indeed.
Yeah, Monaspligis.
And going back to the threes and your symbolism of threes, I found that fascinating. This one idea when you talked about absoluteness and abstraction, giving that abstraction is, as you point out, the essential key to this whole process of understanding Noetic metaphysics. We were talking about the unconscious and the unknowable in European philosophy and that sort of thing. And I thought that was fascinating. And then you got into beingness, which again, I think is that idea that we're going from something very abstract, like being up in Oz, which is fairly abstract, not completely abstract because it's still very formulated, but something that is like a number. It really is without attributes per se. And the number question and this idea of the abstractions gives me that question, just like Pythagoras, who apparently also, from what little I know, also believed that the numbers were entities. So
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, and then you focus a lot on 3 as an entity in and of itself. And I'm wondering, do you know any more about what the nature or the quality of these entities is? Are they like Jan Chohan's or the Logoi or something along those lines?
You know, I tend to look at them in a circle.
Mhm.
So we're looking at one number, a one from no number. So it's one number from no number, but within that, it expresses a kind of a triangulation of numbers, and which is why when we read the stanzas, there's numbers throughout the stanzas, and each of those sets of numbers represent kind of a triangulation. So it's not that any one number works separately from any other number. The fact that you have, I think it was somebody who said, well, what about number two? That's not a triangulation, but the number two is actually a sharing of, I don't want to say sharing, that's the wrong word. The minute you have two, you have three, because you never lost your initial one. So all of those serve not just to build, but also to help in maintaining kind of guidance. It's a guiding power. It is a informing power, and all I can say is they work together. They absolutely work together.
Yes, one thing I'm reminded of with the two sort of immediately going into three is the idea of a person like myself talking to somebody else like you. So we have the I and the you, but all of a sudden then we become a we. So all of us here on the Zoom meeting, as we interact with each other, we're a we. So there's that third element of the I, the you, and the we, or the and that almost seems to indicate that the you, the two, the dyadic you and me, really cannot exist. It's so unstable, like a highly reactive chemical molecule, and then it immediately evolves into three, or this third thing of the we. And I think that's a kind of a fascinating idea with these sort of, as we say, noetic metaphysics, as we're looking at consciousness, because then if the you is, say, a statue, sort of like who was that Greek fellow that wanted his statue of a beautiful woman to become a to become a real woman? If it's just a statue that's inert, then there's no communication. There is no we. There's just I and an it. This inert statue. But somehow creating the we, there's a whole new phenomenon that's created with this minds being able to communicate back and forth to each other. Or the other case, say if someone's in a coma in the hospital, there's I and a you, but there's no we, because the comatose person is unable to participate.
Well, I think it's interesting is, even if, as far as language goes, even if I were to just shout out, run, my brain, or if I hear that somebody shouting out run, my brain is processing it as three things: me, danger, and act now. So I'm processing it in my head as a triangulated subject, object, verb. So we can't conceive of an idea without those three. Even if we're given only one word, we cannot process it without those three. And we do it like that.
Yes, I find that fascinating, and this idea that things are pushed towards movement is quite something. And I think that connects back to what you were saying earlier, Desiree, in the talk about desire. And I found that interesting, that we're going from volition to abstraction. And just the other day, I came across a phrase of cosmic karma. So we human principle of karma as something instinctual or animalistic or something to be avoided. However, as the abstraction is with the force of desire coming into manifestation, that would be, I guess, maybe it is Kamadeva, but it was just in English language. It was just cosmic karma. So I thought,
Well, I think Kema has its own dharma as well. Everything that we study has every force we study has its own dharma, the way it's supposed to be. I guess utilized, and we just don't utilize them well. With our minds are so preoccupied in getting what we want. We don't train ourselves to look at the thing in itself, and like Immanuel Kant would have preferred we do, which is to put our own desires and whims aside, and just to focus on that item of contemplation. And we'd be better off if we did, because we talk about this in class from time to time about habituation, that if you were to take the stimulation away from a very habituated person, let's say somebody who's habituated toward hate, and so that person creates a whole fantasy around this hatred, and it's not that the fantasy is true. Perhaps it gives that person some kind of a means of expressing hatred. The thing is, if you were to take that stimulation away from them, they would have no reason to have that fantasy. It's the fantasy that supplies or legitimizes the stimulation. It's the stimulation that people become addicted to. That people don't become addicted to things. They become addicted to the stimulation of things. So,
and we also add, Desiree, that they become addicted to the habitual thought. So the thought habit is
absolutely.
addiction. So you're addicted to a kind of a negativistic thought, or a thought that you need to be fighting and be hating other things and other people. And that in itself is an addiction. And it kind of, I think, ties back to your slide about abstraction, how it's not this weird thing, but that we do it all the time, every day, when we have thoughts in our mind, make up stories or assessments or judgments, which is kind of the opposite of that Buddhist meditation of the bare awareness, or whatever. I think it's called sunyata, the Zen.
Sunyata.
And Jonathan has a comment here, a question.
Very good.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, Desiree, for just a magnificent presentation. We're here in the lodge. We're just like,
So good.
we're just, I forgot all the, but we're just awestruck here.
All right.
So,
It's true.
yep.
Love you guys.
Okay. So, in this idea of that was just brought up about how we're always kind of making assumptions, and we're always doing some kind of metaphysics, even if we don't think that we are. It is reminiscent of a story that was told in one of the Dalai Lama's books, called "The Universe in an Atom," and he was relating the fact that he was privileged to witness a brain surgery one time, and that was with the consent of the patient, naturally. And but then he had gotten a conversation with the brain surgeon afterwards, and he asked the brain surgeon, do you think there's anything such as top-down dynamic going on? The surgeon says, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean is the effect of thought on the brain. And instead of the brain just, liberating thought, like its thoughts are evaporating out of something and turning into a cloud, and that's thinking. What about the top-down idea? And the surgeon just absolutely dismissed it, just out of hand, just cut him off. No, that's not a thing. That's not scientific. Forget that. And the Dalai Lama wrote, and just in reflecting on that, he's saying, wait a minute, that surgeon is doing a metaphysics. He's asserting a metaphysical idea that there's no such thing as top-down dynamics. So he doesn't think believes in the metaphysical, but he's doing metaphysics. May not be the greatest metaphysics, but that's what he's doing. And I was thinking in terms of this title of Noetic Metaphysics, is there such thing as a psychic metaphysics, or at least a metaphysics that's not informed by nous? And because we have like 5 other series in our Noetic series this year. I forgot what they all are, but they're, like Noetic psychology, Noetic action, so things like that. There was another thought that I was going to add into this. It reminded me of a slide that you had presented where you were talking about that there's a leap that takes place from science and religion, and that HPB was addressing that leap. Do you remember that? But there are like gaps in the thinking, so they're too quick to go to the unexplainable or the unknown.
They go blank. They go blank.
Yeah.
That was in her article. Yeah, I mean her. I think it might have been in the proem.
Yeah, could you address that in relation to perhaps the absence of a noetic metaphysics that the theosophy is providing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that part of the reason why I wanted to start out with the secret doctrines, the theosophical principles, because so much of that is actually answering questions, not just the questions that arise in theosophical settings, but those 3 principles can probably address almost any situation in life. And that's a problem with I think religion and science, is that they just cut themselves off from any challenging questions. We're just not going to look at that. Like, for instance, the doctor. There are plenty of very materialistic doctors out there who, when a person comes back from an NDE experience and tries to explain it to the doctors shut him up right away. And the nurses will tell him, don't ever communicate anything like that to one of our physicians. That's a shame, because it does not benefit the patient. It certainly doesn't benefit the doctor's bedside manner. But it's unfortunate that they can't step out of that very rigid prison they've gotten themselves into. But again, it goes back to this kind of arrogance that our educational systems put out there. They're more concerned with prestige than they are with discovery and exploring the world, exploring every aspect of the world. They should. And there's just a very narrow mindedness that I think is not based in a need to know or a will to know. It's based in just a very unproductive selfish sense of self pride, and arrogance.
I agree. That's right. The pride and arrogance, and even beyond regular physician, doctor people, in their medical school education, which has very little to do with nutrition, for example. And there's all this stuff about nutrition and food as a kind of therapeutic modality. And even like the classical Greeks said, let your food be your medicine. Regarding the experience of the surgeon and the ND, or the doctor and the NDE people, back when I was in undergraduate school, there was one neuroscientist. I had no direct contact with him, but I knew about him, Roger Sperry. And he did a lot of split brain research. He was famous for that. But he also proposed the idea that the functions of the mind, or the thoughts, actually affect the function and even the physiological interconnections of the brain. Namely, that our thoughts, our abstractions, can affect the physical brain organ here in our skull, in the dark space between our ears. It's like, what? And he was really laughed at by a lot of neuroscientists back in the 1970s when I was in undergraduate school. And nowadays, with epigenetics and other kind of new agey type, or I'll say cutting edge science, not new age, but cutting edge science. The idea that there is that neuroplasticity, and even it's been discovered there's neuronal stem cells within the brain that will grow and develop into other types of neurons, even in adult people. So the idea, and of course we know that someone that's had a stroke and been to physical therapy, they can, who didn't maybe say they can't use their right hand anymore, they do physical therapy and all of a sudden they can grab a fork and they can use it. So that's, I think, an important way to say that the abstractions from this abstract metaphysical noetic world can have an effect on the phenomenological, or like Roger Sperry was saying in the 70s, enduring being a bit of a, some of those ideas, people laughed at him. Now, decades later, able to say, yeah, that the thought, these abstractions can precipitate down, as you were saying in one of your slides, into the manifested physical world of, and the Platonic idea too, that it comes down to the physical world of the senses, or the Maya world that we experience with our senses, our human physical senses, realizing that there's more than that. If we can liberate ourselves, we can free ourselves from that limitation.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. Are there any more questions out there?
I'm looking for any hands raised up on my side. I don't see anyone at the moment.
It's about time for, yeah.
We want to close up a little before the top of the hour to give time to transition to the 6 o'clock thing. I see a comment from Robert Moore. He writes, "Thanks, Desiree. Very intriguing discussion of the number 3, and of abstraction." So thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Lori, wonderful presentation. And thank you, Lori, for that input about Frank Baum, the author, who actually wrote,
thank you.
I think, like 20 different volumes of The Wizard of Oz after the first book made into the movie. He wrote a couple of other stories as well. Well, almost 20. All right. Well, thank you all. And just to say that next week it's going to be getting a cue here. The hair, Hair, as opposed to the, like the hair, like Athena coming from the brow of Zeus. So we have the different Hindu rishis that arose from the hair of Brahma.
Yes, the 7 rishis.
The 7 rishis. All right. Well, thank you again, Desiree, and thank you all for showing up to our Aquarian series. And we'll have the recording in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you, Desiree.
Thank you,
Desiree.
Guys, enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thank you.
For now.
Good.
Namaskar.